Okay, check this out. I have a few instances of this compressor across this drum recording. Have a listen. This is one of the most, if not the most versatile analog type compressor out there. It actually has been often referred as the Swiss Army knife compressor. Now, this is not a super old vintage compressor. It has been released back in 1996 by Empirical Labs. But it has been so popular that I think so far it's sold more than 38,000 units. So that's why you probably saw one or several distressors in commercial studios. They're all over the place, and for a good reason. It actually takes the best out of vintage type compressors like the 1176 and also the LA2A. So in this video, I'm gonna bring you with me to show you everything you need to know about working with the DISTRESSOR Compressor by using, in my opinion, one of the best plugin emulation out there, made by Universal Audio. It also emulates the secret hidden feature found on the original analog unit. So stick around for this one. Okay, so let's look at the parameters. We have the four main knobs, the input, which is basically the amount of signal going into the compressor, which will determine the amount of gain reduction you'll get. So it basically has a fixed threshold point. So the amount of signal going to the compressor will determine the amount of gain reduction. And you rebalance that with the output level, so you keep control on your gain structure. Then the attack release. For the attack time, if we bring that down to 0, that means it's going to go down to 50 microseconds of attack time, which is ultra fast. And if we set that up to 10 at its slowest, we're looking at 30 milliseconds of attack time. So it has a very good range when it comes to the attack time. So I kind of like that. But it also says in the manual that if you set the attack time to 0 and use a ratio of 2:1 to 4:1, it could go even faster. Okay, I don't know to which point, but this is what it says in the manual. Now, when it comes to the release time, we're talking about a range between 0.05 seconds to 3.5 seconds of release time. Okay. But when we set that up to Opto mode, which we're going to look at later, it can go up to 20 seconds of release time. And this is due to the program-dependent behavior, again, when it's set up to Opto mode. Now, to reset those main knobs to its default value, I'm going to keep my finger on Option and just click on each of them, and there you go. This will bring you to the default value, which is kind of a good starting point when using the DISTRESSOR. And 6:1 is the default ratio, also, you know, to start working with this compressor. So let's have a quick listen of the DISTRESSOR straight on a drum bus recording. Okay, so if I want to level match the output, I'm just going to bring it down, because in my opinion, the default output level is a bit too loud. So if I bring it at around 5.5, I think that is going to do it. Cool, so that is the starting point when working with the DISTRESSOR. And this compressor is going to work well on everything: vocals, drums, bass, acoustic guitars, name it, okay? It's that versatile. If we look at the ratios, to start with, we have the 1:1 ratio. This is actually quite nice because it actually bypasses compression entirely. So it will basically warm up the signal and act as a color box. So let's try it out right now on this drum bus. So you can actually hear the difference when the plugin is bypassed and when it's engaged. So I get a bit more warmth, a bit more color. I love the vibe, love the sound. So I can actually use the DISTRESSOR without even compressing the signal. Now I just want to show you something pretty cool that we have with the UAD version of the DISTRESSOR. is this HR button here, which is also available on other UAD compressors. Now, this is going to give you or reduce the amount of headroom. So check what that does if I add a bit and if I reduce some of it. So that will give me the chance to avoid adjusting the input and output level to keep the same gain structure. I can just increase or decrease the amount of headroom. And there you go. So it's not something I use all the time, but it's a cool feature to have. Now, when it comes to the 2:1 and 3:1 ratios, they will give us a kind of a smoother knee shape, okay? Which is the transition of the uncompressed signal to the fully compressed signal. And the higher we go in ratio, the more hard the knee will get, basically. So 2:1 and 3:1 will give you smooth compression, 4:1, 6:1, a mid-level compression, and 20:1 will act more as limiting, basically. Now, if we click on 10:1 ratio, that will activate the Opto compressor, which has a special detection circuitry that emulates electroluminescent optical gain reduction. Wow, for a French dude, that was hard to say. And in Opto mode, like it says here on the plugin, I'm going to bring the attack up to 10 and the release down to 0. And that will give me the same type of vibe as an LA2A will give me, which is pretty cool. And that can work pretty well on a vocal.
D'un amour extravagant, d'une couleur sans entend.
Now, if we look at Nuke, this is actually pretty special. Like 20:1, Nuke is more towards hard limiting with a special detection circuit, which can sound pretty cool. Let's try it again on the same drum bus. I don't know if you heard this, but it kind of clicked when I bypassed the plugin. So what I can do is use the bypass button here, and that will avoid the plugin to clip because it's going to keep the plugin active. And you'll see the gain reduction meter is still going to be on, but the processing within the plugin will be bypassed. So it's way over compressed, but it shows you how cool the Nuke setting can sound like. And the way I like to work with it is to blend it with the dry signal. And I can actually do the parallel compression by using the mix knob. That is pretty cool. So this can be used for parallel processing, which is unique to the plugin like HR is. So those two parameters cannot be found on the original analog unit. Now the Nuke ratio also works pretty well on a drum room. Or in my case here, I have a drum room emulation by using the Sound City Studio by UAD once again, and then the DISTRESSOR in Nuke mode, and it sounds so cool. Something I forgot to mention, to change a ratio, you can click on the desired ratio, or you can just switch around like we do on the analog unit by clicking on the ratio button. Then we have the detector circuit, where we can have a high-pass filter added to only on the detection when this one is activated. And the detection high-pass filter is set up to 100 Hertz. At a slope of 6 dB per octave. Okay, so it's a very gentle high-pass filter only on the detection circuit of the compressor. So this way the compressor doesn't react to low frequencies below 100 Hertz. And there's also a bump at around 6K, which will add a bit of high mid-range to the detection circuit of the compressor. And that can work well for harsh vocals. So this way, the harshness found will be detected by the compressor before other bands of frequencies. Now, link, I'm gonna come back to that later, because that is actually part of the hidden feature I was telling you about. So I can activate the high-pass filter, the mid-range bump, or both of them all together. Now, the DISTRESSOR also has saturation, which is quite nice. You can add a high-pass filter straight on the audio signal, which is set up to 80 Hertz with a slope of 18 dB per octave. And you can also activate distortion 2, which will emphasize on the second harmonics, or distortion 3, which will emphasize on the third harmonics, which is similar to a tape machine saturation, basically. So as an example, let me bring the ratio back to 1:1, so I don't get any compression, and I'm just gonna focus on the saturation side of the DISTRESSOR. That's pretty cool. If I combine this with some compression, now the yellow light will indicate when the amount of harmonic distortion reaches 1%. And the red line, if I activate distortion 3, now the red line will indicate when the total of harmonic distortion reaches 3%. And at this point, it also indicates output clipping. If we look at the link mode, this will switch between the stereo configuration or dual mono configuration if you insert the plugin on a stereo channel. So basically in stereo mode, the gain reduction will be the same from left to right. Even if there's louder sounds on one side compared to the other, everything is going to be compressed equally with the same amount of gain reduction. But when that link is off, that means that the stereo compressor will act as a dual mono compressor, meaning that the left and right channels will be compressed independently from each other, so they will not necessarily have the same gain reduction. And again, this is on a stereo channel. And dual mono can be pretty cool and interesting to work with depending on the source you have to mix. It could add a bit more movement, you know, since we don't have the same gain reduction from left to right, and also a bit more stereo width. But for a more stable stereo image and center, stereo mode is going to work pretty well. But this is the kind of parameter that I like to experiment with. And that leads me to the DISTRESSOR's hidden feature, which is related to the link button. So the original analog DISTRESSOR is a mono unit to begin with. So the only way to make the DISTRESSOR a stereo unit with the analog units is to connect two DISTRESSORs together by using the sidechain in and outs that we have at the back of an original DISTRESSOR. And from that point, by activating the link on the first one, it actually linked both units together for stereo compression. But by activating the link button, it did change the sound just slightly for some reason. But this was also the case when using only one DISTRESSOR in mono. So when activating the link, which makes the compressor in stereo, without having a second compressor connected at the back of the first one, that was called the dead patch. And that configuration also changed the sound just quite slightly, adding a bit of harmonic distortion. And UAD decided to emulate this behavior in the plugin, which is quite interesting. Now, it's very, very subtle, I'm not gonna lie to you, but it's worth experimenting with. So basically, if you add a DISTRESSOR on a mono channel and you activate link to make it stereo, it's still gonna be mono because you're on a mono channel, but the tone might change just a bit, you know. But again, it's very subtle, but pretty cool to know about. So if I use the DISTRESSOR on the kick to add a bit more punch, and also on my snare, same here, just to add a bit more punch, with a slow attack, fast release. So this way I get lots of sustain, since it's a fast release. And since I have a slow attack, I get lots of punch. Okay, so that is for the kick and snare. Now I have the Nuke set up to the room effect. And on my drum bus in parallel, I also have the Nuke engaged with a slow attack and fast release. And so let's have a quick listen with all of them engaged and all of them bypassed. Now this is the UAD version of the DISTRESSOR plugin, but there's also other plugins out there that emulates the DISTRESSOR. For example, there's the Arouser made by Empirical Labs. Now this one is based on the DISTRESSOR without being an exact emulation. It's a bit like a version of the DISTRESSOR on steroids. There's more features to play around with, which makes this version of the DISTRESSOR, if I can call it this way, even more versatile. And it sounds pretty good, even if it doesn't sound exactly the same as the original one. IK Multimedia also has a good version of the DISTRESSOR. Again, not an exact emulation, but it sounds good and it's in the same ballpark. And same for the Slate Digital version of the DISTRESSOR. Now there's probably other companies that emulates the DISTRESSOR. Let me know which one is your favorite down below. Now if you want to know more about other analog emulation plugins, you can watch this full playlist where I have videos talking about the 1176, the Pultec EQ, the LA2A compressor, and much more. So click on the link in the video description or right here on top and enjoy.